Hey everyone, it is your girl Carla, better known as Coach K, and I'm coming to you all with a presentation on the MTSS slash RTI process. This was actually a question brought to me from one of my teachers that I support at one of the schools that I'm stationed, and so I decided to do a presentation for her because I am extra like that, and also just because I'm a visual person, and I'm just gonna put it here on my channel in hopes that it'll help someone. Maybe if you're not familiar with the process, if you're new to the field of education, this is definitely something you should expect to happen once you start teaching. So hopefully this will help in learning just what some of the steps are in the process. So let's get started. So what is the difference between MTSS versus RTI? A lot of people use those acronyms interchangeably. And, first, let me actually back up. So, what is MTSS? So, in the field of education, especially special education, we use a lot of acronyms. So, that is something you will definitely have to get used to. And depending on where you are, something can mean completely different from another county. So, for instance, one county that I was at, we called our supervisors that were over special education, we called them LTSCs, which is lead teacher for special education, which stands for lead teacher of special education. However, the current district that I'm at, they call them SELTs, which is special education lead teachers. So essentially it's the same thing, but sometimes the acronyms can definitely throw you off. So just be prepared for that. But I digress. So MTSS stands for multi-tiered support, I'm sorry, multi-tiered systems of support, and RTI stands for response to intervention. Now, just so you know that everything that I'm telling you today is really just coming from the lens of a certain district. Everyone does things differently, depending on what county you're in, depending on what state you're in. But overall, the process is pretty much the same. But just know that procedures may vary depending on the district as well as the grade level that you teach. So as you can see, I have some visuals here, and you can see I have the MTSS umbrella, and essentially that's what it is. RTI is a system for identifying and addressing the specific needs, academic needs of struggling students, whereas MTS is more of a broader scope. So as you can see under that umbrella, you have RTI as well as PBIS, which is another system of support that we use for behavior intervention and support. It can address academic as well as behavior areas as well as attendance. So depending on what system your particular school system uses, all of that would fall under the MTSS umbrella. So as you can see also, I have the tiers. Tier 1 will actually be the whole class. When you are teaching, essentially everyone gets Tier 1 intervention. All right, so typically it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to identify students that may have some academic concerns, which brings me to my next slide. So here is actually a model from a previous school or that I worked at, and I'm going to just kind of keep this up here just for a little bit so that you can kind of see what the steps are. But right here in Tier 1, like I said, all students or behavior concerns that do not respond to those Tier 1 interventions, instructional strategies, differentiation, they are going to eventually be referred to Tier 2. interventions. As shown, the first step is identifying any students with any academic or behavior concerns that are not responding to those Tier 1 interventions. Remember, these interventions are to be given to all students. Like I said, it's essentially the getting to know who your students are, okay? Tier 1 is just your regular classroom instruction, and as mentioned, usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks of monitoring and assessing. So here are some Tier 1 interventions, if you're not familiar, and this would be considered your standard-based classroom. Some would include visual aids, repeating directions, modeling, anchor charts, extra time, using organizers, and more other strategies as well. But like I said, these are strategies that you would use with all of your students in the classroom. And depending on how they respond to those strategies, that's when you make that referral for Tier 2. Okay, so back to the model. Once a student is identified as Tier 2, the grade level representative, and it's usually either the counselor or your AP, which stands for assistant principal, but it could be someone else. It doesn't necessarily have to be those two, but whoever that representative is, they will create a Tier 2 plan. And it says IC. IC actually stands for Infinite Campus, which is the portal that we use in my particular county. You may have some type of other grading portal or wherever you place your students for assessing and monitoring attendance, behavior, academics. That's the portal that usually it goes in. And in my case, in our case, it's called Infinite Campus. So I don't want that to confuse anyone, but like I said, all of this and the procedures may vary depending on where you are. Interventions are determined by the team members, and they should be implemented a total of 6 to 8 weeks. The data that you are recording is usually weekly, along with work samples, assessment data, attendance records, etc. And if the interventions are working, you can actually move back to Tier 1. But if the interventions aren't working, other determined interventions should be implemented for another 6 to 8 weeks. So essentially, you guys will be coming back together. The process can be really tedious, but you have to get that data in. It's data, and once those interventions aren't working, you have to come up with some more and implement those for another 6 to 8 weeks. So how does Tier 2 instruction differ from Tier 1? So Tier 2 instruction is more explicit, systematic, more intense support, with struggling learners receiving more instructional time. Like I said, you can extend time by 15, 30 minutes, more than just your regular Tier 1 classroom reading instruction. Tier 2 is conducted with small, same ability groups within or outside the classroom setting. It also involves frequent progress monitoring to track the student's progress. And like I said, you'll most likely be taking data regularly on a daily or at the very least a weekly basis. During lessons, you monitor students' understanding and mastery of the targeted objective and standard, and you provide additional support. Don't wait, just make adaptations to those Tier 2 lessons. So here are some examples of progress monitoring: weekly 1-minute fluency checks, or you can do bi-weekly 2 to 5-minute digit fluency checks. Also a short assessment on comprehension, every 2 weeks to determine if intervention is working. Some non-examples would be just your regular chapter tests and quizzes that would not be considered sufficient progress monitoring. Now you can use that as your, as work samples, but it wouldn't be considered progress monitoring. How do you know if your intervention is working? Well, a lack of progress on your assessments will let you know. This could take weeks. Like I said, it could take up to 6 to 8 weeks, the first round, and then another 6 to 8 weeks if those interventions aren't working. How can an intervention be changed? You can give more time, they can be more frequent, and also at a different grade level. So essentially, you'll be modifying the lesson. And before deciding if an intervention should be changed or simply replaced with a different intervention, ask yourself these questions. Is progress being made? Would a different intervention help make progress faster? All right, so back to the model. Now, once a student is identified as Tier 3, then your SST team, or whoever the MTSS team is, or other service providers, select more intense interventions. These interventions are implemented more frequently, even more than your Tier 2 interventions, and data is recorded in whatever portal that you use. After 4 to 6 weeks, team members then determine what the next step should be. So what does Tier 3 interventions look like? Tier 3 intervention is the next step for students with extreme reading, math, and or behavior challenges who are not, successful in the Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions. It is more intense and designed to accelerate closing those performance gaps. These students receive ideally 90 minutes of Tier 1 instruction plus the more intensive Tier 3 intervention, about 30 minutes more usually. Repeated opportunities for practice and review, additional correction and feedback, increased time on tasks, drill repetition and practice and review, tasks broken down into smaller steps, learning made visible, and prompts and cues. So as you can see in this particular slide, you see the differences in interventions based on the tier level. All right, so let's take a look at the focus. In Tier 1, the focus is on all students, okay? In Tier 2, your focus is more of small groups of students, no more than 3 to 5 students. And in Tier 3, it's also a small group, but sometimes it can be just 1 to maybe 5 students. Actually, I would recommend maybe no more than 1 to 3 students in your Tier 3. Okay, frequency and time. In Tier 1, it's more quick, targeted, presented just in time, 1 day a week. In Tier 2, you're provided in a just-in-time time frame, 2 days a week, about 20 to 30 minutes. And Tier 3 is also provided in a just-in-time time frame, 4 days a week, about 30 to 45 minutes. All right, and then finally, your progress monitoring, you're going to be formally assessing the students. And that's, like I said, with all students. In Tier 2, data is collected on a more regular basis to determine if the intervention should be continued, altered, or replaced. This is beginning at Tier 2. All interventions must be formally assessed. And then at Tier 3, data is collected on a regular basis to determine if interventions should be continued, altered, or replaced. And of course, like I said, you're doing it more often in Tier 3. All right, and this part right here, you don't really need to know because this is kind of a whole nother presentation. But once your SSS team has determined that Tier 3 interventions are also no longer working, then you can decide whether or not these individualized, specialized interventions would be the best option. So you have your Tier 4 supports like ESOL, gifted, as well as special education / interrelated. So this is just basically an RTI summary report. This is what we essentially just take minutes on at the meetings. We're going over, obviously, the students' current data, the grades that they have in their core subjects, ELA, math, science, and social studies. And also you want to document their test scores from statewide testing from the previous year, any interventions that have been currently implemented in the classroom, any teacher concerns as well as parent concerns, and then ultimately the decision that the team has come up with. Here is just an RTI Tier 3 intervention data sheet that we use. And you can also use it for your Tier 2 interventions as well. You can alter it however you want. If anyone is interested in getting some of these forms, I don't charge. You're more than welcome to reach out to me. I will place my contact information, my email address, in the description box, and I can just send you some of these if you are interested in that. But your school may have their own documentation form that they want you to use, so just be aware of that. And here's another assessment data form. And last but not least, your behavior interventions. And remember, under MTSS, you can focus on just more than academic challenges. Sometimes you need to focus on behavior as well as attendance, and you may have a whole nother system of support for that. So that wouldn't necessarily be RTI, but you will go through the same steps as the academic interventions. You try to focus on the positive behaviors, and you want to teach students proper and positive behaviors. If the Tier 1 behavior systems aren't working, whatever interventions that you normally use in the classroom, which is basically, going over the classroom expectations, rituals, and routines. If those aren't working, the intervention specialist will provide you with those Tier 2 interventions. And if Tier 2 isn't effective, the student will receive Tier 3 support. We have to do our due diligence to ensure student is unable to control the behavior. We can't just refer the student just because they are hard or difficult to deal with. And I know as teachers, especially because some of us have 20, 30 students in the classroom, but that's why it's so important to make sure that you're collecting your data consistently. So that is it. I really hope that this was helpful. I hope I wasn't too all over the place, but if you do have any additional questions, please post them below, or you can reach out to me. Like I said, I will place my email address in the description box. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you soon. Bye.